rest of his life. First came confusion as she tried to understand where the recording was coming from. Then recognition as she realized these were her own words being broadcast to everyone she knew. Finally, pure panic as she understood that her carefully constructed facade was crumbling in real time in front of the most important people in both their lives. She tried to grab the phone from Alex, stammering something about the recording being taken out of context, but the damage was already done. Her parents looked absolutely mortified. Her bridesmaids stood frozen in shock, and the guests began talking among themselves in increasingly loud voices. Some people started getting up from their seats, clearly uncomfortable with being part of such a public disaster. Others pulled out their own phones, either to record what was happening or to call people who weren't there to tell them about the incredible drama they were witnessing. Alex's family looked devastated, not just by Lucy's betrayal, but by the public humiliation their son was enduring. His mother had stopped crying tears of joy and was now crying tears of heartbreak for what her son was going through. His father's face was red with anger, both at Lucy for what she'd done and at the situation Alex had created by exposing her deception in such a dramatic way. His brother Jake looked like he wanted to punch someone, though it wasn't clear if that someone was Lucy or Alex himself. The officiant, clearly out of his depth in handling such an unprecedented situation, tried to restore some kind of order to the proceedings. He suggested that perhaps everyone should take a moment to collect themselves, that maybe there was some explanation that would make sense of what they'd all just heard. But Alex cut him off, speaking directly to the crowd in a voice that was surprisingly steady given the circumstances. He told everyone that he was sorry they'd had to witness this, that he tried to find another way to handle the situation but couldn't bear the thought of living a lie or allowing Lucy to continue deceiving people who cared about both of them. He explained that he discovered Lucy's true feelings the night before but had been too shocked and hurt to know how to respond appropriately. He thanked everyone for coming to support what they thought was going to be a celebration of love, and he apologized for turning their day into something so ugly and painful. Lucy finally found her voice and started screaming at Alex, calling him cruel and vindictive for embarrassing her in front of everyone. She accused him of recording her private conversations illegally, of violating her trust and privacy in the most despicable way possible. She claimed that what she'd said on the phone wasn't how she really felt, that she'd been venting to a friend and hadn't meant any of it seriously. But her explanations rang hollow in the face of the detailed, calculating conversation everyone had just heard. Some of Lucy's friends and family members tried to come to her defense, suggesting that maybe she'd just been having cold feet and saying things she didn't mean. But the recording was too specific, too detailed, and too coldly delivered to be dismissed as pre-wedding jitters. She talked about timelines for the divorce, strategies for maximizing her settlement, and her relationship with another man in ways that made it clear this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a long-term plan she'd been developing for months. The venue erupted into chaos as people began choosing sides, with some supporting Alex's right to expose Lucy's deception and others condemning him for handling it in such a public and humiliating way. Arguments broke out between family members and friends who had different opinions about what had just happened. The photographer continued taking pictures, though now he was documenting the complete breakdown of what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. Security guards eventually had to be called to help clear the venue as people began leaving in groups, some in support of Alex and others in disgust at the entire spectacle. Lucy's parents hustled her out of the building as quickly as possible, clearly hoping to minimize the damage to their family's reputation. Alex's parents stayed behind to help deal with the logistics of canceling the reception and handling the vendors who'd been hired for the celebration that would never happen. By the end of the day, Alex found himself alone in his childhood bedroom, still wearing his wedding tuxedo and staring at the ceiling while trying to process what had just occurred. He'd achieved his goal of exposing Lucy's deception and making sure everyone knew the truth about her character. But the victory felt hollow and painful, leaving him with a sense of emptiness that was somehow worse than the betrayal itself had been. The weeks following the wedding disaster were the darkest period of Alex's life. News of what had happened spread through their social circles like wildfire, with everyone having an opinion about whether he'd handle the situation correctly or not. Some people praised him for his courage in exposing Lucy's deception, calling him a hero for refusing to be taken advantage of. Others criticized him for the public humiliation he'd caused, saying he should have handled things privately and saved everyone the embarrassment of witnessing such a spectacle. Alex stopped going to his usual places, avoiding the country club, the charity events, and the business gatherings where he knew people would stare at him and whisper about what had happened. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and acquaintances, some offering support, and others simply wanting to gossip about the drama they'd witnessed. He ignored most of them, unable to face the idea of discussing his broken engagement and shattered trust with people who probably saw it more as entertainment than genuine tragedy. His family tried to be supportive, but Alex could see the strain the situation had put on them as well. His mother blamed herself for not seeing through Lucy's act, wondering aloud how she could have been so wrong about someone she'd welcomed into their family. His father was furious about the money they'd spent on the wedding and the damage to their family's reputation, though he tried to hide his anger when Alex was around. His brother Jake kept offering to track down Lucy and make her pay for what she'd done, not understanding that revenge wouldn't heal the wounds she'd left behind. After a month of barely leaving his room and declining all social invitations, Alex made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He announced that he was leaving town indefinitely, that he needed to get away from everything and everyone that reminded him of his failed relationship and public humiliation. He packed a single suitcase, withdrew some cash from his account, and drove away from the life he'd always known without telling anyone where he was going or when he might return. Alex ended up in a small mountain town called Pine Ridge, a place he'd found by literally pulling off the highway when he got tired of driving. It was the kind of community where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the biggest excitement was usually the annual Harvest Festival or a new business opening on Main Street. There were no country clubs or charity galas, no society photographers or gossip columnists who might recognize him and resurrect the story of his dramatic wedding day. He rented a modest apartment above the local bakery, a far cry from the luxury accommodations he was used to, but exactly what he needed to start over with a clean slate. The apartment came furnished with basic necessities and had a view of the mountains that helped calm his mind when the memories of Lucy's betrayal became too overwhelming. The bakery owner, Mrs. Henderson, was a kind woman in her 60s who didn't ask too many questions about why a well-dressed young man had suddenly appeared in their small town looking like he was running from something. For the first time in his adult life, Alex had to think about money in practical terms. He deliberately left his credit cards and family connections behind, wanting to experience life the way most people lived it rather than relying on his inherited wealth to solve problems or provide comfort. He found a job at the local hardware store, helping customers find tools and supplies for their home improvement projects. The work was simple and honest, requiring nothing more than basic knowledge and a willingness to learn from the more experienced employees. His coworkers at the hardware store were genuine people who accepted him at face value, never suspecting that their quiet new colleague came from a world of privilege and wealth. They invited him to join their weekly poker games, included him in their weekend fishing trips, and treated him like just another guy trying to make an honest living in a small town. For the first time since his engagement had ended, Alex felt like he could breathe normally and interact with people without wondering what they really thought about him or what they might want from him. It was at a local coffee shop that Alex first encountered Caroline, a woman who seemed to embody everything he thought he wanted in a fresh start. She was beautiful in an understated way, with long auburn hair and green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she laughed. She worked as a real estate agent in town and had a reputation for being ambitious and determined, qualities that Alex found attractive after his experience with Lucy's deception. Caroline seemed interested in him from their first conversation, asking questions about his background and showing genuine curiosity about what had brought him to Pine Ridge. Their first few dates were exactly what Alex needed to start feeling human again. Caroline took him to local restaurants he never would have discovered on his own, introduced him to her friends and colleagues, and made him feel welcome in a community where he'd initially felt like an outsider. She was intelligent and funny, with strong opinions about everything from local politics to the best hiking trails in the area. Most importantly, she seemed to accept him as the hardware store employee he appeared to be, never questioning why someone with his obvious education and refinement was working such a basic job. But as their relationship developed over the following months, Alex began to notice things about Caroline that reminded him uncomfortably of his experience with Lucy. She was always very interested in his financial situation, asking pointed questions about his future plans and whether he had any family money or inheritance he might be expecting. When he explained that he was basically living paycheck to paycheck and had no significant assets or prospects, her enthusiasm for their relationship seemed to cool noticeably. Caroline started making subtle comments about his job and lifestyle that felt more like criticisms than observations. She'd mentioned how ambitious her other friends were, how they were all working toward bigger and better things while Alex seemed content to stay in his current situation indefinitely. She'd point out expensive items in store windows and sigh about how nice it would be to afford such luxuries, always making sure Alex understood that his current income level wasn't sufficient to provide the lifestyle she really wanted. The breaking point came during a dinner at Caroline's apartment where she'd invited several of her friends to meet Alex. Throughout the evening, she made increasingly pointed jokes about his modest means, his simple job, and his lack of ambition for anything greater. She told stories about their dates in ways that highlighted how little money he'd spent on her, comparing him unfavorably to other men she'd dated who had taken her to expensive restaurants and bought her costly gifts. Her friends joined in the mockery, treating Alex like he was some kind of charity case that Caroline had taken on out of pity rather than genuine affection. They talked about successful men they knew, always making sure to emphasize how much money these men made and what kinds of luxurious lifestyles they could provide for the women in their lives. Alex sat through the entire evening feeling like he was being systematically humiliated by people who had no idea they were talking to someone who could have bought and sold most of their assets without even thinking about it. What made the situation even more painful was the presence of Caroline's best friend Emma, who seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the way the evening was going. Emma was a teacher at the local elementary school, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner that stood in stark contrast to Caroline's increasingly aggressive social climbing. Throughout the dinner, Emma tried to redirect conversations away from money and status, asking Alex about his interests and opinions in ways that suggested she actually cared about his answers rather than just looking for ammunition to use against him. After the other guests left, Emma stayed behind to help clean up, while Caroline went to take a phone call from someone she claimed was a very important client. Emma used the opportunity to apologize to Alex for the way he'd been treated, explaining that Caroline sometimes got carried away when she was trying to impress people and didn't always realize how her words affected others. She seemed genuinely concerned about his feelings and embarrassed by her friend's behavior. Over the following weeks, Alex found himself thinking more about Emma than about Caroline. While Caroline continued to make cutting remarks about his financial situation and lack of ambition, Emma went out of her way to show him kindness and respect. She'd stop by the hardware store just to say hello, never buying anything expensive but always treating Alex like his opinions and experiences mattered. She invited him to school events where she worked, introducing him to her colleagues and students in ways that made him feel valued rather than judged. Emma had a way of listening that Alex hadn't experienced since before his relationship with Lucy had started deteriorating. She asked thoughtful questions about his thoughts and feelings, remembered details from previous conversations, and showed genuine interest in getting to know him as a person rather than evaluating him as a potential provider or status symbol. When he talked about feeling lost and uncertain about his future, she offered encouragement and support without trying to fix his problems or tell him what he should be doing with his life. The contrast between Caroline and Emma became more obvious with each passing day. Caroline's interest in Alex continued to wane as it became clear that he wasn't going to suddenly reveal hidden wealth or ambitious career plans. She started canceling dates, making excuses about being too busy with work to spend time with him, and generally treating him like an inconvenience rather than someone she'd once claimed to care about. Her behavior was so similar to Lucy's calculated coldness that Alex wondered if he was somehow destined to attract women who saw him as a means to an end rather than a person worth loving. But Emma's kindness remained constant, never dependent on what Alex could provide for her or what he might become in the future. She seemed to genuinely enjoy his company, laughing at his jokes, even when they weren't particularly clever, and seeking out his opinion on everything from books she was reading to problems she was having at work. She treated him like a friend whose thoughts and feelings mattered, never making him feel like he had to prove his worth or justify his existence in her life. One evening, Caroline finally showed her true colors in a way that even Alex couldn't ignore or rationalize. She'd invited him to dinner at an expensive restaurant,